Hello, this is the final session on exam technique for conflict intention, Hitler's foreign policy and steps to World War II. So the question that we're going to have a look at today is question 4. This is the biggest question that we tackle in GCSE history on the conflict intention paper. It starts with a statement about an event. How far do you agree with this statement? Explain your answer. This is worth 16 marks, and there's also 4 marks for spelling, punctuation and grammar up for grabs. Well, this isn't that bad a question despite the fact that it's 16 marks, because there's a really simple formula to follow. What you're doing in this question is you're evaluating, you're deciding, you're weighing up how far you agree with a statement. So the first paragraph is simple because you're talking about whatever statement mentions. So the statement might say something like, the Nazi-Soviet pact was the most important cause of World War II. How far do you agree with this statement? So in the first paragraph, well, you talk all about the Nazi-Soviet pact. What was it? What happened? But then really importantly, you're linking it back to why it led to war and coming up with a couple of reasons for that. That's dead important because what that does is it allows you to show the examiner you have knowledge about the event, but you can also explain how it's relevant to the question, how far it led to World War II, how important or significant was it. So your first paragraph, you know what you're writing about because the statement tells you. Your second paragraph is a little bit more difficult because your second paragraph, you've got to decide on what the next thing is you're going to talk about. Well, if it's about causes of World War II, for example, if we're talking about this particular module, well, you come up with another thing that caused World War II. So you might say, do you know what, I actually think it was Hitler's actions in the 1930s, his aggressive foreign policy, or his aims. And that might be what you talk about in paragraph 2. Again, you don't just tell me what they were, you tell me how they led to war. That way, you're actually evaluating, you're making decisions about how far each of these events or elements actually led to war. And in paragraph 3, you find another one. You might decide in paragraph 3 that you're going to look at something like appeasement, because that was another cause of war. Finally, in your conclusion, you answer the question. What you try and do in the conclusion as well is show that there is an interrelation, a relationship between these different things, because one of these things wasn't working in isolation. We wouldn't have had the Nazi-Soviet pact without Hitler's aggressive foreign policy, for example. So this is about a 20 to 24 minute job to do a really strong answer. The example that we're going to be working through in this lesson is the following. The Anschluss was the most important event in helping Hitler achieve his foreign policy aims. How far do you agree with the statement? Just pause this, have a little think about, you know what the first paragraph is going to be about. You know the first paragraph is going to be about the Anschluss. Try and have a little think about what else, what other events might you talk about in Hitler achieving his foreign policy aims? And we're going to have a look at the whole thing together in a moment. What are we going to write in our first paragraph then? Well, we're going to be writing all about the Anschluss. So what do we know about the Anschluss? Well, we know that Hitler had tried and failed to take over Austria in 1934. We know that he tried again in 1938 after getting the Austrian Nazi Party to cause bother across the border in Austria. He met with the Austrian Chancellor Schuschnigg and demanded the union of Germany and Austria. Schuschnigg, though, was pretty clever about it all, and what he did was he decided to hold a vote, a plebiscite, but the German army and Hitler, really afraid that they would be defeated in the plebiscite, they invaded before that could be held. Hitler then obviously unleashed a load of propaganda, arrested 20,000 Austrians to stop the vote going against him, and 99.75% of the German population voted in favour for the Anschluss. So that's the bit where we're kind of telling you about the events, but then you need to make sure you're linking it back to the statement. You're thinking about how that helped Hitler achieve his foreign policy aims. So what you talk about there is you talk about, well, the first thing it did was it allowed him to help abolish the Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles said that Germany and Austria should never be united. And so what he was doing was breaking that treaty, and also the Treaty of Saint-Germain, which was the Austrian treaty as well. It helped him also achieve his aim of expanding German territory and uniting German speakers. The Austrians were German by tradition. They spoke the same language. They had the same culture, the same history. It didn't help him with all its foreign policy aims, of course, though. It wasn't actually, defeating communism or anything like that, but it was expanding German territory. It was making Germany bigger, stronger, and certainly destroying the Treaty of Versailles. Here's what I wrote then. So Hitler had tried to take over Austria in 1934, but failed. He tried again in 1938 after getting the Austrian Nazi Party to cause problems. He met with Schuschnigg and demanded the union of Germany and Austria. Schuschnigg decided to hold a plebiscite, a vote, and the German army invaded before this could be held. In the end, 99.75% of Austrians voted in favour of the Anschluss. All of that is just about the event. The rest of the answer is all about me linking it back to the statement. I'm looking at how it helped him achieve his foreign policy aims. So this helped him achieve some of his foreign policy aims. Firstly, it helped him towards abolishing the Treaty of Versailles, as the treaty had said that Germany and Austria should never be united. By doing this, he was in direct violation or breaking the treaty. It also helped him achieve his aim of expanding German territory and uniting German speakers, as the people in Austria spoke German. However, it did not help him in his aim of defeating communism, but it did strengthen Germany. So in that paragraph there, I've done two very, very clear things. I have explained what happened in Austria with the Anschluss, but I've also related it back to the question and said how it helped Hitler achieve his aims. Let's move on to paragraph 2. What could our second paragraph be about then? I decided that I was going to do this one about the remilitarisation of the Rhineland, because if we're thinking about events that helped Hitler achieve his foreign policy aims, the Rhineland was one of the key turning points that really gave Hitler a huge amount of confidence. So what would you talk about in this paragraph? Well, in this paragraph, you talk about the background behind the event, you talk about the fact that Germany decided to take this opportunity at this moment because of the alliance between France and Russia. Also the fact that Britain, France and the League of Nations were distracted by what was going on in Abyssinia, and also kind of the events itself and what happened in the Rhineland and how that helped Hitler. And ultimately, of course, it was a big achievement on the road to destroying the Treaty of Versailles. So let's have a look at what I wrote. Okay, so what have I written about this time? So another event which helped Hitler achieve his foreign policy aims was the remilitarisation of the Rhineland. Prior to 1936, Hitler had secretly and then openly rearmed Germany. He faced no opposition and this allowed him to become more daring. In 1936, France and the USSR had signed a defensive alliance. Hitler claimed that this threatened Germany. At this time, Britain, France and the League of Nations were busy with the Abyssinian crisis, and Hitler saw an opportunity. On the 7th of March 1936, Hitler ordered his army into the Rhineland. It had orders to retreat if the French opposed it. They did not. But when Britain and France did nothing, and the German troops were welcomed as heroes. So how do we relate it to the question? It was a huge victory for Hitler, who had openly broken the Treaty of Versailles and successfully faced down Britain and France. The Rhineland had been a significant psychological victory. Hitler began to believe that Britain and France would always back down. It encouraged him to go further. So he's getting further and further into his foreign policy aims because of events like this one. What's our final main paragraph going to be on then? I decided that one of the key events that really helped Hitler get what he wanted was the Sudeten Crisis and Munich Agreement of 1938. So in this particular paragraph, you're going to talk about, how Hitler had promised to reunite the German people, destroy the Treaty of Versailles. He'd already delivered on quite a lot by this point, but the Sudetenland, of course, was an area that 3 million Germans lived in. Essentially, it was an area that he had his eye on for some time. He accused in early 1938 the Czechs of real atrocities against the German population there and threatened military intervention. So then he had those series of visits from Chamberlain to Hitler, culminating, of course, in the Munich Agreement between Chamberlain, Mussolini, Daladier and Hitler. And at that point, they decided to hand the Sudetenland over to Germany. Czechoslovakia wasn't even invited at that point, and Chamberlain returned to England with that piece of paper, feeling really, really victorious. Hitler occupied the Sudetenland. He decided that now at this point, nobody was ever going to stop him, and he was going to go further and further and further. So he broke the Treaty of Versailles, he expanded territory, and he brought more and more Germans back into the fatherland, into the Reich. So what have I written here? So Hitler promised to reunite the German people and destroy the Treaty of Versailles. I think that's a nice one that links straight back to the question. He had already delivered on some of his foreign policy promises. Now getting to the story of the Sudetenland, but the Sudetenland was crucial to his plans. In September, I should have written 1938 there really, shouldn't I? Hitler accused the Czechs of atrocities against Germans in the Sudetenland and threatened military intervention. War now seemed imminent. Chamberlain met Hitler at Berchtesgaden on the 15th of September and agreed on a plebiscite, a vote. Hitler promised that this was the last problem and he would make no more demands. Chamberlain got the Czechs to agree there'd be a vote. A week later, on the 22nd of September, Chamberlain met Hitler at Bad Godesberg. Hitler made more demands. Chamberlain refused, but said it was just a quarrel in a faraway country. Britain was on red alert for war. On the 29th of September, Chamberlain, Mussolini and Daladier from France met Hitler at Munich and gave the Sudetenland to Germany. Czechoslovakia was not even invited to the talks. Chamberlain returned to England with his piece of paper agreeing peace. Hitler occupied the Sudetenland, saying it was the start of a 1,000-year Reich. Hitler now decided, so we're going back to his aims here, that Britain and France were worms. He was encouraged to go even further. This allowed Hitler to break the Treaty of Versailles, expand Germany, and return Germans to the Reich. Conclusion is absolutely vital in this kind of question. Of course, you've got to address the how far do you agree with this. So you're going to decide in terms of the Anschluss. Yes, I completely agree it was the most important event. I believe it was an important event, but not the most important event. You've got to make it clear what your actual answer to the question is. But you've also got to demonstrate your understanding of how all the events, all the things you've talked about are interlinked and interrelated. That's what's going to get you to the higher level here, to show how one thing fed into the other. That actually the Anschluss may not have happened had it not been for the remilitarization of the Rhineland, for example. But that the Anschluss itself led on to events that actually were even more important in helping Hitler achieve his foreign policy aims. Let's have a look at how I tackled the conclusion in this worked example. In conclusion, the Anschluss with Austria was important. It allowed Hitler to break the treaty and reunite Germans. However, the Sudeten crisis and Munich Agreement delivered even more. It allowed him to break the Treaty of Versailles and expand Germany and return Germans to the Reich. It also gained him armament factories and the pride of succeeding against other foreign leaders. In reality, though, he would not have had the confidence to demand the Sudetenland had he not had success in Austria or the Rhineland prior to this. Each time Hitler was successful, he became more and more convinced that he would never be stopped. So I've demonstrated that I've understood that it was important, but I actually have decided that it was Sudetenland that was more important here. But then at the end, what I've shown is how they were all interrelated, that one thing could not have happened without the other. Your job then is to have a go at this last question. This is your job for today's lesson. So you'll have listened to me talking for about 15 minutes there, going through how you'd answer that kind of question. And now you're going to have a go yourself for about 20 to 25 minutes, which will take you towards the end of today's lesson. So the example that I want you to have a go at is like a really, really good, a really classic one. The Nazi-Soviet pact was the main reason for the outbreak of the Second World War in 1939. How far do you agree with this statement? Explain your answer. You can tackle this in a couple of ways. You're obviously going to start with the Nazi-Soviet pact. You're going to talk about what it was and why it led to the outbreak of the Second World War. What you could do then is you then could talk about some other individual events and incidents that led to World War II. So you might talk about, some of the events we've already talked about today, the Anschluss with Austria, the Sudeten crisis. Those kind of things might be things you talk about. I might be tempted in my other two paragraphs, though, to talk a little bit more generally. I'd be tempted in this question to maybe have one paragraph where I was talking about Hitler's foreign policy. So I might say, actually, it was Hitler's foreign policy that was the main reason for the outbreak of the Second World War. So I might talk about some of the things that he achieved. I might talk about rearmament. I might then talk about remilitarization of the Rhineland. I might talk about Austria, all in one paragraph. It allows you, this kind of question, to kind of put a few things together. So my second paragraph, if I was answering this, would be about Hitler's aggressive foreign policy. My third paragraph, I would probably choose to write about appeasement. The British in particular and the French giving in to Hitler was a key reason for World War II. And that, of course, allows you to talk about something like the Sudeten crisis in detail, but, you know, appeasement in more detail as well. So that's just some ideas. But as long as you're answering the question and giving lots and lots of knowledge and relating back to the question, it doesn't really matter what you talk about, as long as it's something to do with Hitler's foreign policy at this point and the events that were going on in the 1930s. So about 20 to 25 minutes, have a go and send it to your teacher.